wholesale business or drastically raise rates. To that end, the FCC found in their Communications Marketplace report that the wireless market concentration was currently at 3,100 HHI. HHI measures how competitive a market is, with a higher number meaning it's less competitive. The Justice Department's horizontal merger guidelines state that a market with an HHI above 2,500 is highly concentrated. So we really aren't starting from a great spot. An increase of 200 points would raise significant concerns about competition. This merger is expected to result in a market power increase of 280 points for the postpaid market and 2,014 points for the prepaid market. That would take the prepaid market from where it is right now at 2467, which is just under DOJ's threshold, to 4481, a level that raises lots of red flags. These kinds of numbers have historically resulted in higher prices for consumers, less competition, and less innovation. Now, I appreciate both executives' statement that they believe that this merger will benefit consumers and result in lower prices, and their commitments to an accelerated deployment of 5G and the promises of expanded rural broadband. These are national objectives that are important to me and many members of this committee. However, I've seen a lot of mergers in this industry and others, and it's hard to think of one where consolidation didn't result in people losing their jobs, prices going up, and innovation being stifled. I look forward to hearing from the testimony from our two telephone companies that wish to merge and from the other panelists. And with that, I yield to the ranking member, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I could just take a point of personal privilege also to express my deepest sympathies to our friend and colleague, Debbie Dingell, on the loss of Chairman Dingell. And the chairman loved this committee. You know, this room is named after him. And I had the privilege of getting to know him in my days, not only on this committee, but when I first got to Congress. Again, he loved this committee, he loved this House, but most of all, he loved his district, the state of Michigan, and all that he did for it. So with that, I wish the Dingells my deepest sympathies on the loss of the chairman. And again, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for convening our panel of witnesses today, and to our witnesses, thanks very much for being here. We appreciate your time. I look forward to hearing your expertise and different perspectives as we discuss the future of the telecommunications marketplace and learn more about the proposed merger of T-Mobile and Sprint. With any talk of merger comes a long list of potential benefits and drawbacks, and this one is no different. I understand from the CEOs of T-Mobile and Sprint who are with us today that there are many pro-consumer outcomes possible if the merger is approved. These potential benefits range from providing mobile broadband to millions of unserved and underserved Americans living in rural areas to helping the United States win the global competitiveness race to 5G. But I also understand from several of the witnesses representing groups here today that the combined company could pose some harm to consumers. Some of the potential drawbacks include the possibility to eliminate jobs or increase the price that consumers pay for access to wireless service. Our role in this committee is not to weigh the merits of these arguments and determine if this merger is in the public interest. Congress gave that role to the FCC, who along with the DOJ performs a more traditional antitrust assessment on the merger, and these two agencies will ultimately determine if the merger is going to be approved. Our role in this subcommittee is to provide policies that advance the telecommunications market, including expanding access to broadband to all Americans. One way to do this, especially for rural America, in many areas in my district, is to build 5G networks. In areas where the broadband is not currently deployed, 5G networks can help connect Americans to high-speed internet for the very first time. And in areas where broadband is already available, 5G networks provide a competitive alternative. This proposed merger reportedly will promote these objectives, and I look forward to hearing more about the ways in which the companies plan on doing that. But I also am interested in hearing from all of our witnesses today. This will be an enlightening discussion. The final decision about whether it's this proposed merger on these two companies is in the public interest is up to the FCC. Again, I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today and your testimony and the responses to our questions. And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the hearing today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Pallone, Chairman of the full committee, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Doyle. Today is our first hearing since the loss of our chairman, John Dingell. It's fitting that this room is named the John Dingell Room. After all, over 28 years as the top Democrat on this committee and over his nearly 60 years in the House, he fought to ensure the committee maintained its broad jurisdiction, had deliberative debates, followed regular order, conducted robust oversight, and produced legislation in the public interest. And in keeping with John's tradition, today we focus our microscope on the proposed merger of two of the four large nationwide wireless phone carriers, T-Mobile and Sprint. Collectively, these companies directly employ more than 80,000 people and serve more than 130 million customers. These companies are no stranger to merger discussions. In 2011, a struggling T-Mobile was almost purchased by AT&T, but was blocked by the Obama administration, and T-Mobile nevertheless went on to flourish. T-Mobile and Sprint attempted to merge 2 years later, but abandoned the deal after competition concerns were raised by regulators. Now, once more, the parties are seeking approval to merge. This hearing marks the first time in 8 years that the committee has met to evaluate the consequences of a merger. For too long, the House and this committee paid little attention to that responsibility, but now we resume the practice of reviewing major acquisitions so we can fulfill our obligation for the people to determine how this proposed consolidation will affect consumers, workers, public safety, and network resiliency, competition, and future innovation. For the last 8 years, major industry consolidation occurred without significant oversight, and the consequences of that have been borne by consumers and hardworking Americans. In the past, we've seen mergers jack up consumer prices, cut away meaningful choices, and outsource, undercut, and eviscerate good-paying jobs. We've seen previous merger conditions that weren't met or weren't enforced. We've seen the public interest in all its forms undermined, and that's why we must look carefully at these issues before a merger is approved. In this case, the transaction is currently being reviewed by the FCC, as well as the Department of Justice. As part of our oversight responsibility, we must make sure that the FCC is carefully reviewing the facts and keeping consumers' best interests in mind when deciding the fate of the merger. And I know we're going to have many hard questions today because the facts surrounding this merger are so much in dispute. For example, Mr. Ledger says that new T-Mobile won't raise consumer prices, but others say his company's filings acknowledge consumers could see price hikes, some argue by up to 15%, with the merger being particularly hard on the poorest consumers. How can we be sure that consumers who can least afford to pay more are not harmed by the merger? T-Mobile filed a letter committing not to raise prices with the FCC. Putting aside whether that's sufficient, there's a serious question as to whether the trumped FCC would be willing to impose any conditions in a merger order. Mr. Ledger says that the merger of T-Mobile and Sprint will be a net job creator on day one. But the Communication Workers of America say we should expect a loss of 30,000 jobs. The truth will have long-term implications for American families across the country. And Mr. Ledger says that new T-Mobile will create a world-class 5G network. But opponents say that both T-Mobile and Sprint have committed to investors to deploying 5G networks as separate and independent companies. 5G deployment is important, obviously, and valuable to consumers in the economy, and whether the merger expedites 5G rollout merits consideration. And Mr. Ledger also says that the merger of T-Mobile and Sprint will help new T-Mobile compete with AT&T and Verizon, all while new entrants and cable companies begin to compete in wireless. But smaller carriers worry the merger might snuff out existing and new competitive players that rely on wholesale access to T-Mobile and Sprint's networks. To this end, we must understand not only how the merger affects the current wireless marketplace, but also the marketplace of the future. And finally, Mr. Ledger says that the merger of T-Mobile and Sprint will help new T-Mobile build out robust rural broadband, while others argue that new T-Mobile will shut down 25,000 cell towers across the country. And I'd like to understand whether this is accurate and whether it will have a negative effect on the resiliency of the wireless network during disasters. So, Mr. Chairman, there are a lot of conflicting opinions on the impact of this merger, which is why this hearing is so important, and I hope that members will get the straight answers here today, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Walden, ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as you all have said, I know we all have the Dingell family in our thoughts and our prayers on this difficult week. John Dingell taught us all how to be legislators. He was a legend in many respects. And nobody, despite everybody's attempt, has ever been able to do the yes or no questioning as effectively as Mr. Dingle did. We've all tried to emulate that. And so he is missed. He will never be forgotten. And I'm glad we're all honoring his life, his work, his service, and remembering Debbie in our prayers. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to echo my colleagues' warm welcome to all of our witnesses today and to thank you all for making the time to come share your thoughts with the subcommittee. We've generally avoided hearings focused on specific transactions in an effort to allow the regulators who are actually responsible for assessing them to do their work as much as possible, free from intense political influence. It's been my hope that experts at the FCC and the Department of Justice, who as we speak are reviewing this transaction and its potential impact on public interest and competition, will continue their analysis without undue political pressure. Now, in a district like mine, which would stretch from the Atlantic to Ohio, it's a district that gives new meaning to the word rural. We have coverage gaps that engulf huge areas of the map in places with as few as one person for every square mile. For Americans in some of these areas who have been awaiting the promise of broadband for far too long, with the connectivity, educational, and economic empowerment it brings, any news on this front is great news for celebration. So we've been appreciative of T-Mobile's rapid build-out efforts in Central Oregon and as a result of its newly acquired 600 megahertz licenses. With this committee's bipartisan work last year to keep the repack on track, with an additional $1 billion for reimbursement of broadcasters' moving expenses, more and more districts are realizing the benefits of groundbreaking incentive auction that we made possible through the action of this committee. The hope is finally becoming a reality in many of our areas of the country, and I think it's well worth noting T-Mobile's efforts so far in delivering on its promises, and in some cases ahead of schedule.
To maybe stop the clock for me for a second, if we could, on John Dingle, two.
To introduce our witnesses for today's hearing. First, we'll have Mr. Marcelo Clawray, Executive Chairman of Sprint Corporation. Next, Mr. John Ledger, Chief Executive Officer and President of T-Mobile US. Next, Mr. Chris Shelton, President of the Communication Workers of America. Then we'll have Ms. Carrie Bennett, General Counsel of the Rural Wireless Association. Mr. Doug Brake, thank you, Doug, Director of Broadband and Spectrum Policy for the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And last but not least, Mr. Philip Barronbrook, Senior Policy Counsel with Public Knowledge. I want to thank all the witnesses for joining us today. We look forward to your testimony. At this time, the chair will recognize each witness for 5 minutes to provide their opening statement. But before we begin, I want to explain our lighting system. In front of you, of the witnesses, is a series of lights. The light will initially be green at the start of your opening statement. The light will turn yellow when you have 1 minute remaining. And please wrap up your testimony at that point. The light turns red when your time has expired. Mr. Clawray, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Before we begin, I want to pay my respect to Chairman Dingle and his long-standing service to this country. It's an honor to be here today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. I would like to take the opportunity to explain why Sprint's proposed merger with T-Mobile will be great for the American consumers, will be great for Sprint employees, and will be great for our country. I'll go into details in a moment, but before I do so, I want to tell you a little about me. First, I'm an immigrant. I immigrated to the United States as a young man from Bolivia. I had very little money. I went to a small university in Boston, and I received a priceless education. Second, I'm an entrepreneur. After I graduated college, I founded a company called Brightstar. I started selling phones out of my car, and I gradually grew Brightstar into the largest mobile phone distribution and supply chain services company in the world. We worked very hard and grew over $10 billion in sales and thousands of employees. I'm most proud that we made Brightstar the largest Hispanic-owned business in the history of our country. In 2014, I sold Brightstar to SoftBank. Immediately after that, I became Sprint CEO. At that time, Sprint, a Kansas company, was near financial distress. In 2013, the company lost $5 billion, and in the previous 10 years, Sprint lost over $25 billion. And we had approximately $31 billion in debt. A great company with tens of thousands of jobs across the U.S. was at risk. Beginning in 2014, we undertook a massive and painful transformation of the company. We worked hard the same way we did at Brightstar, from the ground up. We reduced our expenses close to $6 billion through cost reductions, employee layoffs, and some unwanted transfers to jobs overseas. We didn't want to, but we had to. Today, Sprint is no longer in financial dire straits, but we face some significant challenges. Despite our success, we were unable to fix our main challenge, the quality of our network. We could not fix our network because of our poor financial condition and our lack of low-band spectrum. Because of our network quality, Sprint still struggles to attract lots of new customers, and many customers that we acquire leave at a faster pace than our competitors. Customers today are not willing to sacrifice quality. Today, the U.S. wireless market has become a duopoly. Verizon and AT&T have close to 70% market share, and they control 93% of the cash flow generated from the industry. As a result, it's very hard to invest and compete at the same level. Today, we're at a technological inflection point. Over the next few years, 5G is coming, a new standard of connectivity. It's going to completely change the way we connect and the way we live our lives. But Sprint doesn't have the resources to build a 5G network to provide the necessary competition against the AT&T and Verizon duopoly. We estimate that we would need close to $20 to $25 billion just to offer 5G in our limited coverage area. And because we don't generate any cash flow, we would have to raise more debt, and to pay for that debt, we would have to increase our prices to the American consumer. The only company that can build the world's best 5G network is a combination of Sprint and T-Mobile. And we can only do this if this merger is approved. As a combined company, we're committed to invest nearly $40 billion over the next 3 years to build the world's best 5G network with nationwide coverage. How can we do this together? It's simple. It is the marriage of two necessary and complementary 5G pieces. Sprint has high-capacity spectrum, which we've acquired over many years. T-Mobile has broad national coverage spectrum. It is capacity plus coverage. Today, we can build the world's most advanced, covering every corner in America in urban, suburban, and rural areas. We cannot take lightly that America needs to lead the world in 5G. China had made it their priority to win the 5G race. They're investing billions. When a country has the best network with the latest technology, it brings massive economic stimulus, explosive job growth, and a new wave of entrepreneurs. America is a land of innovators and disruptors. Let's keep it this way. My story validates this. Letting another country take the leadership away from the U.S. will cause irreparable damage. This is an opportunity of a lifetime. In addition, yes, we are committed to lower prices. When we merge our two companies, we will create 8 times the network capacity that we would have on our own. We'll have to beat AT&T and Verizon on price to fill this capacity. This makes financial sense, it is good business, and most importantly, it is our commitment. Lastly, it is true that most mergers do not create jobs. This merger is the opposite. This is a growth story. This new company will create new jobs, blue-collar, white-collar jobs, jobs in urban, suburban, and rural America. We'll need skilled network engineers, construction crews, enterprise sales teams, call center jobs that we're going to bring back from overseas, and new sales reps for the new stores that will be opening. I can't thank you enough for allowing me to speak today. As I mentioned, I'm grateful to this country, and as an American entrepreneur, I hope you will approve this merger. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ledger for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Doyle, Ranking Member Latta, and other members of the subcommittee for inviting Marcelo and me and the rest of the panel here today. Before I begin my remarks, let me offer condolences to Congresswoman Dingell on the loss of her husband, John Dingell, a towering figure in the House and a leader in this committee. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you about the tremendous benefits of the proposed T-Mobile Sprint merger and the progress we're making towards making it a reality. So first, what will this merger deliver? It will deliver a supercharged Un-carrier, which can ensure U.S. leadership in 5G, increase competition, and create American jobs. First and foremost, the new T-Mobile will make sure America wins the global 5G race. This is so important because 5G will unlock new capabilities that will fuel innovation and job creation well beyond anything we've seen so far. 5G will completely transform the way Americans live, work, travel, and play. 5G means real-time navigation, downloading a movie in seconds, instant language translation, and much more. Nearly every business in America will be able to use 5G to revolutionize how they create and deliver goods and services. Best of all, with this transaction, the benefits of 5G won't just flow to big cities. Combining Sprint and T-Mobile will produce a faster, broader, deeper network that is truly nationwide. It will benefit consumers and businesses everywhere, including rural America. Neither company could achieve this on its own. Second, new T-Mobile will have the capital, the scale, and the network to supercharge competition, unleashing significant benefits for consumers that includes keeping prices low. The combined company will continue the T-Mobile tradition of disrupting the wireless space, and we will disrupt in-home broadband with new wireless broadband options, freeing millions from the stranglehold of big cable. Budget-conscious customers have the most to gain because they consume the most data. They have the most to gain when data costs less. It will be a huge leap across the digital divide. Our opponents are wrong when they claim that the merger will lead to higher prices. In fact, the opposite is true. Consumers will win with lower prices and better services. How? Our costs will drop sharply and our network capacity will expand tremendously. I am so confident that the merger will lower prices that we're willing to put our money where our mouth is. Last week, we committed in writing to regulators that we will make available the same or better rate plans as those offered by T-Mobile or Sprint for the next 3 years. Third, this merger will be a tremendous jobs creator at New T-Mobile and across our country. Our merger will be jobs positive from day one and going forward. The build-out of our 5G network, investment in new customer care centers, and expansion into new businesses like video distribution, broadband, and enterprise services means thousands more jobs than the two standalone companies would have needed. In the first year, we will have thousands more employees than the standalone companies combined. By 2024, we have 11,000 more employees. Our critics are wrong about the impact on jobs. I've looked at their arguments and supposed analysis, and they do not make sense. They ignore the facts. They don't account for any areas where jobs will grow, like network integration or new customer care centers. And by the way, we've heard this story before. They said we would cut 10,000 jobs when T-Mobile merged with Metro PCS. In fact, we expanded jobs by thousands. Let me say this to every T-Mobile and Sprint employee working in one of our stores today. Each of you will be offered a job with the new T-Mobile. Our opponents have also lobbed false allegations that this transaction will allow Huawei and ZTE into U.S. networks. Let me be clear. There is no Huawei or ZTE equipment in our network today, and there never will be. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Many have already recognized the tremendous benefits of this merger. CFIUS and Team Telecom have completed the national security review and approved the transaction. 16 of 19 states have completed their reviews and found the transaction to be in the public interest, and nearly 200 organizations, companies, government officials, and community leaders publicly support the transaction. I'm particularly honored that Congresswoman Eshoo, Congressman Shader, Congressman Long, and 10 other members have signed a bipartisan letter of support. To those that doubt us, I would simply say this. We are the uncarrier. My management team and I believe on delivering on our promises, and we know if we do not, we will lose the credibility and the trust of our customers and employees. I can promise to you the new T-Mobile team will deliver for consumers, American workers, and for our country. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ledger. The chair now recognizes Mr. Shelton for 5 minutes.
Chairman Doyle, Ranking Member Lara, Chairman Pallone, Ranking Member Walden, and
Microphone on,
sorry.
and point it towards your face there a little bit so we can.
Chairman Doyle, Ranking Member Lara, Chairman Pallone, Ranking Member Walden, and members of the committee. First, let me offer CWA's condolences on the passing of Chairman Dingell to all of you and to his family. My name is Chris Shelton. I'm the president of the Communications Workers of America. We represent 700,000 employees in telecommunications and other industries, including more than 45,000 in wireless. Let's tell it like it is. This merger would kill American jobs and raise prices on American consumers to enrich two foreign companies, Deutsche Telekom from Germany and SoftBank from Japan. Our analysis shows that 30,000 Americans would lose their jobs. More than 25,000 of those jobs would be in retail stores all across the country. Some owned directly by Sprint and T-Mobile, others owned by independent retailers. The other job cuts would be in headquarters. Sprint and T-Mobile compete with each other for the same type of customers, often low-income households, which is why their stores are located near each other's, sometimes right across the street. We'll see in Newark, New Jersey, how close the stores are together. You can see from the maps how Sprint and T-Mobile stores tend to be right next to each other. This is especially true for the prepaid brands, Boost and Metro PCS, which tend to be concentrated in lower income areas. So if the companies merge, why would they keep two neighboring stores open? Chances are they won't. Rather than the merger will mean pink slips for 30,000 wireless workers across the country. You heard the CEO of T-Mobile say that they will add jobs. Pardon my language, but that's just bull. Without binding and enforceable commitments, and I mean commitments that have no loopholes, such promises are just cheap sales and talk and are easily broken. First, T-Mobile doesn't differentiate between internal employees and contractors, short-term temporary hires or long-term employees. Upgrading towers, for example, usually is done by temporary contractors, not full-time employees. Second, Mr. Ledger talks about call centers, but both companies have a long history of offshoring call center jobs, moving them to the Philippines, Mexico, and other non-U.S. locations. Third, T-Mobile has a track record of buying companies and then cutting jobs. After it acquired Iowa Wireless in 2018, it closed all iWireless call centers and more than 90% of its retail locations. It closed every single store in rural Iowa. Finally, trusting Sprint and T-Mobile with American jobs is like trusting a vampire at a blood bank. These are two of the worst companies in the United States when it comes to labor law and the treatment of workers. In recent years, T-Mobile has been charged with more labor law violations per worker than even Walmart. Violations include surveillance of employees and prohibiting workers from talking to each other about internal workplace investigations, even regarding sexual harassment complaints. And what about the people lucky enough to stay employed? The merger would drive down wages for all wireless retail market workers, in some cases by as much as $3,000 per year. Fewer firms competing for skilled labor means that each firm will pay its workers less. Employers compete for that skilled labor with wages and benefits. Take away competition, and the remaining companies can throttle down employees' compensation while jacking up prices on consumers. Both are symptoms of the same disease, too much market concentration. If Sprint and T-Mobile had not fought their workers who wanted a union, perhaps the employment and wage impact would not be as bad, but they did, and it is. To sum up, 30,000 fewer jobs, lower wages by as much as $3,000 per year, disproportionate harm to low-income communities, higher prices for all consumers, all to help a state-owned German company and a Japanese billionaire make more money. Members of the committee, that is not in the public interest. It's economic treason. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Ms. Bennett, you're now recognized for 5 minutes. Please make sure your microphone's on and pull the microphone towards you. Yeah, thank you.
Chairman Pallone and Doyle, ranking members Walden and Latta, and members of the subcommittee. My feet don't touch the ground either, just so you know. My name is Carrie Bennett, and I'm with the Rural Wireless Association, and I first want to express my condolence to all of you all for your loss with Chairman Dingell. May his memory be a blessing. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today to discuss the impact that the proposed T-Mobile Sprint merger will have on rural America. RWA opposes this merger. We've heard a lot of promises from T-Mobile over the years that have not been met. So we have no reason to believe that T-Mobile will follow through on their new promises if they are allowed to reduce competition. In short, this merger is bad for competition. It's bad for consumers, especially in rural areas, who will experience fewer choices, price increases, and substandard service. It should be denied. T-Mobile has a poor track record in rural America. Let's face it, T-Mobile is making a lot of promises about how they will expand coverage in rural America and improve service for these Americans. But they have a long track record of doing just the opposite. And we have no reason to believe that this will change if the merger is approved. In fact, we think it will get a lot worse. I'm going to run through 3 examples of T-Mobile's behavior that have my members concerned. Roaming. Roaming arrangements are important to rural Americans. Roaming keeps urban, suburban, and rural Americans connected. Sprint has historically worked with rural carriers to ensure rural Americans have robust mobile wireless service. T-Mobile is not. In fact, according to our members, T-Mobile's roaming rates are 20 times higher than Sprint's. And T-Mobile's existing roaming agreements are one-sided. T-Mobile will frequently enter into unilateral roaming arrangements under which a rural carrier subscribers can roam on T-Mobile's network with no possibility of T-Mobile subscribers roaming on the rural carrier's network. In such cases, T-Mobile has simply determined that it is better for its own customers to do without coverage in rural areas, rather than pay the rural carrier for network access. This means that in those areas, T-Mobile's customers cannot be reached and are basically off the grid, all because T-Mobile chooses to restrict access. Do we really want a new T-Mobile's 100 million plus subscribers, which would be more than 1/3 of the market share, to be unable to access rural carriers' networks across the country? Next, rural call completion. Less than a year ago, the FCC found that T-Mobile failed to correct ongoing problems with the delivery of calls to rural consumers. In fact, T-Mobile admittedly inserted false ringtones into these calls so that the caller believed the call was ringing on the other end, when it wasn't. Aside from blatantly breaking the law, T-Mobile's actions severely hindered rural consumers from running their businesses, communicating critical information to family and friends, and reaching emergency service personnel. This callous behavior, in an effort to save money, underscores the fact that T-Mobile's treatment of rural Americans is not in the public interest and harms rural telephone companies who would have received payments for terminating those calls. We believe that T-Mobile's destructive behavior will continue, perhaps even more aggressively, once its rival Sprint is eliminated. Last, false broadband mapping claims. Our members have serious concerns about T-Mobile's broadband maps submitted in the FCC's Mobility Fund proceeding. That fund was created to provide $4.5 billion to mobile carriers over the next 10 years to help connect rural Americans who lack quality wireless broadband service. To make sure they know where the money is needed the most, the FCC asked wireless carriers to submit maps indicating where each carrier offers qualifying 4G broadband coverage. According to testing done by our members, when T-Mobile submitted its data, the company vastly overstated its rural coverage to make its reach even seem bigger than it was. When rural carriers went to test T-Mobile's claims, 95.8% of the tests showed speeds below the threshold demanded by the FCC, or no 4G broadband service at all. In many of the places where T-Mobile certified it had coverage, cell sites had not been even put into operation. If left unrectified, carriers will be denied funds, causing a loss of service to rural consumers who rely on this funding to connect. The FCC is currently reviewing this issue, but before the FCC can make a public interest determination regarding this proposed merger, it must first find that T-Mobile has been honest in its dealings with the FCC. Our members' drive tests strongly suggest otherwise. The FCC should not approve a merger if an unresolved enforcement proceeding is pending. I thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brick, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Doyle, Ranking Member Latta, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to share the views of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, or ITIF, on the pending merger of T-Mobile and Sprint. First, let me briefly echo the condolences to the Dingle family. He was a real legend and will be missed by all of us and all the members, as well as his Twitter followers everywhere. With that, ITIF strongly believes that a combination of Sprint and T-Mobile would bring about a better future for American businesses and consumers compared to one which each company attempted to continue alone. In my written testimony, I explore several reasons to support this merger. In these opening remarks, I would like to focus on three key issues. First, this merger provides an accelerated transition to robust 5G. Second, more competitors is not always better. Or put another way, there's nothing special about the number 4. And lastly, I'd like to discuss the right way to define the market when thinking about this transition. First, and perhaps most importantly, 5G. The key point here is that a combined firm would have both the spectrum assets and financial strength to deploy a robust 5G network with broader coverage and significantly more capacity compared to what either company could provide alone. Not all 5G is the same. Around the world, carriers are in the process of exploring business models, deploying pilots, and incrementally replacing old equipment with new 5G gear. These initial exploratory offerings are different in kind, however, from the 5G network the parties envision. The combination of T-Mobile's low-band, wide coverage 600 megahertz spectrum and Sprint's high-capacity 2.5 gigahertz spectrum would make for a high-performance, nationwide, next-generation network that would help propel U.S. leadership and economic competitiveness, not just in 5G itself, but in the applications that an advanced network enables. This is incredibly important because 5G is anticipated to being more than just faster, more responsive phones. The technology is designed to be adaptive to a wide variety of use cases, hopefully driving significant productivity gains throughout the economy. The capacity from a new 5G network would effectively increase the supply of wireless services, again, more than the two companies could provide separately. We should expect this increased supply to maintain downward pressure on prices, including in the wholesale and prepaid market segments. Second, let's talk about competition. You'll hear some of my friends, or you already heard some of my friends on the panel, argue that the government must preserve 4 carriers for competition. But competition is a means, not an end unto itself. Of course, any market can have too few competitors, but it can also have too many, resulting in wasteful duplication of resources. I want to stress that again. More competitors is not always better. This is especially true given the economics of communications networks, which feature tremendously high fixed upfront costs to serve a given geographic area. These high fixed infrastructure costs allow for vigorous competition with relatively few competitors compared to other industries. We should want infrastructure companies to compete at sufficient scale. A combined company could do more with less, allowing the new firm to drive greater value throughout the business, ultimately passing a significant share on to consumers in the form of lower prices, a higher quality network, or innovative new offerings. A market of 3 healthy, relatively equal-sized companies that continue to invest and innovate is far, far better than a lopsided market with 2 firms considerably stronger than the others. There is no reason to preserve 4 for 4's sake. Lastly, it is important to not define the market too narrowly and acknowledge the dynamic forces changing competition. 5G is accelerating what are already rapidly differentiating business models in wireless services. Basic connectivity is increasingly commodified, and wireless companies are instead looking to new revenue sources to recoup their large ongoing investments. These new revenue opportunities include Internet of Things services, connected vehicles and drones, over-the-top video services, advertising, and perhaps most notably, fixed wireless broadband to the home, which is in turn prompting cable providers to explore wireless entry. These new business models, with value-added services built on top of basic connectivity, are likely to keep downward pressure on price for the traditional bundles of voice, text, and data, whether there are 3 or more facilities operators. Because this merger will accelerate flourishing U.S. 5G future, improves the market structure with 3 strong firms with sufficient scale to vigorously compete, and comes at a time of rapidly changing business models, we believe it is in the public interest and hope it is quickly approved. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Behrenbrook, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Lata. and members of the subcommittee, and I want to associate myself and public knowledge with the statements of the panel and the members of the subcommittee honoring Chairman Dingell's life and his service. Thank you for inviting me to appear today, and thank you for shining a light on the harms of the proposed Sprint T-Mobile merger. Today's hearing will show that this proposed merger is a bad deal for consumers, for competition, and for America's wireless future. The evidence clearly shows that this transaction does not serve the public interest and is unlawful under the antitrust laws. As you consider this deal, ask yourself, what will it mean for each of your constituents who rely daily on their smartphones? The answer is clear. They will ultimately pay higher prices and have fewer choices for wireless service. Since announcing their intention to merge in April 2018, the companies have failed to show that the merger would not violate competition laws. They have failed to show that the merger would affirmatively serve the public interest as required for FCC approval, and they have failed to show that other public interest benefits would be offset by the merger's substantial reduction in competition. The evidence Sprint and T-Mobile have presented to the FCC and the Department of Justice shows that consolidating the wireless market down to 3 national players would result in substantially higher prices for consumers. And you don't have to take my word for it. The economic analysis submitted by the companies admits as much. Recent promises that the merged company will not raise prices in the near term underscore the obvious. Post-merger, the marketplace will not be competitive enough to discipline the 3 remaining national carriers when they raise prices. The proposed transaction will eliminate competition and choices for consumers. It will inflict significant harm on low-income prepaid and rural consumers who can least afford to pay more. Additionally, the deal will lead to tens of thousands of lost jobs and lower wages for the workers that remain. The merger will eliminate avenues for new competitors to enter the wireless market. And finally, the deal will harm small and rural wireless providers and their subscribers who rely on competitive choices for roaming and wholesale. Remember, under the FCC's public interest analysis, the company's burden is not merely to show that there is a lack of public interest harms. They must demonstrate specific public interest benefits that would directly flow from the transaction. The FCC is charged with affirmatively promoting competition, not merely maintaining or protecting the existing level of competition. The companies have not shown that this merger would increase competition or benefit the public interest. The Commission's public interest standard is rooted in the text of the Communications Act, and the Commission is charged with ensuring the availability of advanced telecommunications to all Americans and that quality services are provided at just, reasonable, affordable rates. The merger would frustrate all of these fundamental goals. For nearly a year, Sprint and T-Mobile have attempted to overcome these overwhelming yet predictable harms to the public interest, consumers, and competition. To distract from the damage this merger would inflict on wireless competition, the companies insist that this merger is about competing with cable companies. Don't buy it. We've heard this before. This is exactly the same song AT&T and T-Mobile sang when they tried to merge in 2011. Policymakers, the public, and enforcement agencies rejected these arguments then. These claims are similarly hollow and misleading today. The merger benefits alleged by the companies have collapsed under public scrutiny, and the company's economic and engineering models have come under substantial attack, and they actually undermine the case the companies are making here today. The DOJ, the FCC, and this subcommittee must follow the objective evidence they collect, rather than relying on unverifiable and unenforceable commitments made by the companies. That evidence includes prior public statements by the companies themselves, prior FCC and DOJ evaluations of 4-to-3 wireless market mergers, international wireless market comparisons. All of this evidence clearly shows that the merger will gut competition in the wireless market, lead to dramatically higher prices for every wireless consumer. Further, the evidence undermines the speculative and unverifiable benefits the companies continue to allege and have done so here today. To be clear, this merger is not necessary to build 5G networks. It will not increase investments in 5G. On their own, the companies are already competing to deploy robust 5G networks. This will continue, preserving the well-documented benefits of vigorous four-firm competition. And it will not lead to new deployments in rural areas or help close the digital divide. Thank you for your invitation to appear here today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you.
With the conclusion of witness testimony, we're now going to move to member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions of